Welcome to the Creating Healing Communities Train the Trainer webinar. My name is Harold Dean Trulier, and I am the National Director for Healing Communities USA. And we're glad you could join us for this opportunity for certification as a trainer. This training assumes that you've been through the basic training that we do at the local church level or the regional level, and will certify you to continue in training work of healing communities. So let's get started. Okay, let's begin with prayer. Gracious and eternal God, we give you thanks for this opportunity to be part of this Train the Trainer seminar. We come to you on behalf of the families of our congregations that are impacted by crime and incarceration. We pray that your mercy would be evident through us as we reach out to those who are hurting because of their grief and those who have been hurt by the system and by the actions of others. We pray for your restorative justice to reign on earth as it does in heaven. In Jesus' name, amen. The Healing Communities mission is to train, equip, and support the work of congregations and their ministries to support individuals and families affected by incarceration. Our goal is to produce stations of hope that support individuals in prison, persons coming home from incarceration, returning citizens, survivors of crime, and the children and the families of each. We're not an outreach movement. Many of the churches we work with do outreach, but our job is to train and equip congregations. Healing Communities is a model of congregational culture development that supports the work of the ministry. It's important to note that people want to do outreach, and that's important. But for us, the client, if you will, is the congregation. So what we're doing is we're not doing evangelism. We're doing training of congregations within the context of which they can do evangelism. And so we want congregations to focus on the families in front of them. We're going to begin with a slide that many of you have seen already. This is a slide of Beverly Walker and her family, her children, grandchildren, and she's holding a picture of her husband, Baron Walker. Baron was serving prison time in the Wisconsin state system, and Beverly went to her church and asked for help and support. Church told her, well, we think you're still a young woman, you're still attractive, you should look for another husband. She was very upset by that and left the church and joined a church that had a very strong prison ministry. When she joined the church with the prison ministry, she asked them, will you help me with my husband? And they said, sure. What prison is he in? And she said, Fox Lake. They said, we don't go to that prison. So even with a strong outreach prison ministry, it's not necessarily the case that the family left behind will find ministry. And that's where Healing Communities comes in. Beverly Walker had what we call disenfranchised grief. She was hurt by the loss of her husband. Now, it was not a loss as like a death, but it is a certain kind of absence, right? When a person is incarcerated. And when you have the loss through death, we have all kinds of rituals that we use. We have funerals, we have wakes, we have viewings, we have family repasts. We make sure that we minister to the entire family because we want them to know that we care about them and help them through their grief process. However, when a person is locked up, we have no rituals around that in the church, but people are still grieving because of the loss of a loved one. Beverly Walker's other issue was she needed justice because Baron's sentence should have ended years ago, but the state of Wisconsin put in the Truth in Sentencing Act and made it retroactive. And so his sentence was changed from 20 or 40 sentence with the possibility of parole to 60 years. And that had to go all the way to the Supreme Court of the state of Wisconsin, but it did get reversed. And here's a picture of me with Beverly and Baron after Baron came home in April. The reason that justice reform is important is because we need criminal justice policy that is fair and just and godly. And Beverly needed both of those And that's where Healing Communities congregations come in. That's why your church is already a station of hope. Now, remember the vision that we have for Healing Communities: to engage congregations in healing and restoration by treating the prison or the jail the same manner as the hospital. We also support our own members, individuals and their families affected by crime, incarceration, and prisoner reentry, creating space for reconciliation, and developing the service to advocacy pipeline. The focus is on the congregation. The focus is on the station of hope. And so, in our trainer certification, what we're going to be doing is to remind us again that it's the church that becomes the station of hope. The congregation becomes the station of hope. And that this means our goal is to produce stations of hope that support individuals in prison, persons coming home from incarceration, who are returning citizens, survivors of crime, and the children and families of each. We do not train congregations to become service providers, though some certainly have that capacity. Yet we do attempt to ensure that all congregations in our movement are placed within a network of service. We help you know where the housing is, where the employment opportunities are, who's doing citizens' rights advocacy in the community, where is substance abuse treatment, what kinds of educational opportunities are involved. As a trainer, when you go to a congregation to train them in the model, you should have all of that information to give to a congregation so that they can help support men and women who are coming home and who need these kinds of services. So, who do we train? We train local congregations. And when we train local congregations, one of the questions we want to ask is, how does a pastor or leader envision the best manner of introduction? Is there a process in the congregation that makes the best sense? In other words, there's some churches that will say, we want you to come and do a training. And we come, we do the training. And then there are other churches who say, well, my congregation may not be ready for a training yet. Can you come and preach or share on a Sunday morning? And then there are other churches where they just want to launch the ministry on a Sunday with an altar call and then use that as an impetus to do the training the following week. So having a conversation with church leadership about those three things, what comes first, the training, the preaching, or the launch? And we've had congregations that have asked for each. One pastor says to me, if I tell people we're having a training, they'll come on Saturday, stay over on Sunday and preach and do the altar call. We'll do it all in one weekend. Other congregations want to have we already have a prison ministry, so please meet with them first. So we want to be sensitive when we're working with a local church as to how to best introduce it, and a pastor and the leadership of that church should know that. But sit down with the pastor and discuss what's the best process through which to introduce Healing Communities to the congregation. Sometimes it's a smaller group, maybe the leadership team, or maybe the prison ministry. But we recommend that you talk with the pastor, because the pastor will know what his or her congregation is best suited to in terms of the manner of introduction. Because you have the training and then you have the launching. Sometimes we train clusters of congregations, a regional group. When we do this, we encourage trainers to have an awareness of what's going on in that particular region. So that if we're doing a training in the state of Ohio, I always spend a lot of time talking about women in the criminal justice system, because Ohio has such a high rate of female incarceration. In fact, Ohio literally had to shut down a men's prison and convert it to a women's prison because the numbers of women going to prison in Ohio is growing so fast. So I want to know what's going on locally if I'm doing something with a regional group. I want to know what's going on with their county jail system. How's that? What does access there mean? What are the trends there? So having regional awareness of what the trends are, who's going to prison, and by the way, here's a footnote for Ohio. The percentage of women going to prison in Ohio is going up because of the arrest and conviction rates of rural white women. It's not black women in Cincinnati, Cleveland, Columbus. It's rural white women. So it helps. I'm sorry?
Is it opiates and?
Yes. and it's opiates, and it's also crystal meth manufacturing. A lot of the crystal meth manufacturing has moved to rural areas where it can fly under the radar of the police department, but where you've got tough on crime elected judges. Policy in Pennsylvania, we just went through some major policy issues with regard to letter writing and books. You should know what's going on in that particular system. Do a little research ahead of time and have some awareness of what's going on in that region. Then there are times when we work directly with denominations. We've worked with the United Methodists, the American Baptists, Progressive National Baptist Convention, the AMEs, the Abundant Harvest Fellowship of Churches. And in each of these cases, one of the things that we wanted to know was, how does the Healing Community Framework fit into their theological framework? Sometimes we do partnerships with denominations, and then there are other times, like with the AMEs and the Abundant Harvest Fellowship of Churches and the United Methodists, where we've trained denominational representatives to be the trainer for Healing Community Stations of Hope. In the AME tradition, sometimes they don't even use the Station of Hope language. They have their project is called the Covenant Project. That's okay. It's the same work, and we thank people like Shellerine Lang and Charles Boyer for bringing healing communities to African Methodism. Other groups, there's more. Always want to say that, but wait, there's more. Sometimes we'll have meetings with religious leaders, local councils of churches, regional clusters of pastors meetings, sometimes a county reentry task force, a number of states here in Pennsylvania as well as in Ohio, for example, have county-wide reentry task forces. New Jersey has them as well. And so we can do a short presentation, and I'll talk more about the length of the presentation. We do a short presentation in those settings to introduce leaders to the Healing Communities Framework. Sometimes we're in a classroom setting. Healing communities have been presented in academic classrooms within a variety of settings: colleges, seminaries, Bible school, even as a class. It can be a semester-long class, or it can be a unit in a class. Sometimes we've presented for government and community agencies. In partnership with state, local, and county agencies, we've had to do an interfaith training. So we do have the Interfaith Handbook on the website that you can use. I'll talk more about the resources in a moment. But this gives you the opportunity to work with wardens, chaplains, departments of correction at the state level, local agencies, service agencies. We've partnered to do a training with Bread for the World in Florida. We've worked with chaplains here in the state of Maryland. And so all of these are venues for introducing the Healing Communities Framework. Local churches, regional clusters, denominations, religious leaders, classroom setting, and government and community agencies. How do we train? Full training usually takes about 6 hours. There's 6 parts to it: the philosophy of healing communities, the role of forgiveness, the role that leadership plays, the role that the congregation plays, networking and advocacy, and then a planning session. Sometimes people will do a full 6 hours on a Saturday. Sometimes we may have to shorten it to 4 hours. We recommend at least 4 hours, if not 6. And then it can be done in 3 2-hour sessions or 2 3-hour sessions. Or one of our local churches in Washington, D.C. did 6 weeks for Sunday school of the training. Sometimes we're limited to a lecture or a workshop. I've been asked to do plenary addresses in a number of places where I had to explain the philosophy of healing communities. There you give a basic overview, 60 to 70 minutes with Q&A. You can use the full PowerPoint and get through it without the video in about an hour and 15 minutes. And so that's another format that you'll want to have in your arsenal. Sometimes you're on a panel. I'll be on a panel at the Proctor Conference in February of 2019. And when I'm on a panel, I emphasize the framework distinctiveness and congregational culture shift. We used a 3-pager, one of the resources that you can download from the website that gives the 8 basic points of basic components of healing communities. Sometimes then finally we train in a course with each topic as a unit. We've taught this at a number of seminaries. The Black Church Studies program at Ashland Seminary, here at Howard University School of Divinity, Eastern University, Cuts, a number of places where we've used this in the classroom setting. And the textbook that we recommend is Ministry with Prisoners and Families, The Way Forward, which is written from a healing community's perspective and has a specific chapter on healing communities as well. And what's the content? Well, we start with an introduction when we're having a training session. Obviously, there'll be protocols to go through and giving honor to God with the pastor and opening with prayer. Well, we actually begin the PowerPoint, but we start with the philosophy of healing communities. How do we reduce shame and stigma? Making sure that we're starting with our own congregation, making sure that the people there understand this is a congregational culture initiative. On more than one occasion, people have come up and said, well, I want to do prison ministry. Well, this is not a prison ministry seminar. This is a seminar on taking care of individuals and families who are impacted by crime and incarceration. And sometimes that does involve going into the prison. But remember Beverly Walker's case, her church only went to one prison. So if her husband was in another prison, they weren't in a position to help him. We want to be in a position to minister to all of the Barron Walkers in our congregation, all of the Beverly Walkers in our congregation, irrespective of what facility they're in. And then after the philosophy of healing communities, next comes the story of forgiveness. And we use the DVD, A Justice That Heals, which currently is now also available on YouTube. It's a great story. You've seen it in your training session. And we usually have a discussion, a Q&A after that. And then that brings us up to a halfway point. If it's a Saturday, that's a good time to break for lunch. People are talking about what they've seen. And then after lunch, we reassemble and we talk about the role of faith leaders. We address the pastor and what we want the pastor to do. And then if the pastor's not present, then we challenge the members to take notes for the pastor, because the pastor plays a very important role, as you know, in the Station of Hope. And we talk about the role of congregations and the ministry of presence and the practical applications, things that we can do as a congregation, the support groups, giving people rides to the facility, writing letters, sending cards, sending postcards, all of the things that are on our slide. More contact, more success. And then if time permits, an introduction to advocacy groups that churches and congregations can affiliate with that are taking on the various policy issues that they will come in contact with by virtue of engaging the system. And then we want to close with a good 20 to 30 minutes of beginning the planning process. What can our church do now? How can we begin to implement this if as soon as possible? What are our resources? Well, you know our website, www.healingcommunitiesusa.com. If you go on the resource toolkits page, you'll see several things. First thing you'll see is the 3 versions of the handbook. You'll see the Black Church version, you'll see the ecumenical version, and again, when we're working with government agencies or non-sectarian agencies, we can use the interfaith version. You can even use the table of contents as a handout to introduce people to the handout, or to the handbook rather, or there are congregations that we know of, or trainers that we know of, that actually make a copy of the handbook as part of the training and pass them out for, obviously those are sessions where there's a fee involved to cover the cost. Then there's a PowerPoint. You've all seen the PowerPoint, you've seen a version of it. I recommend that you customize it so that it reflects the group you're going to whom you're going to speak. I never use the same PowerPoint twice. I always change it so that the religious tradition is addressed, or the region is addressed, and county issues, state issues. Try to make sure that people know that the PowerPoint is for them. The generic version is available in our national office, and all you have to do is contact us, email us at the national office on our webpage, and we can send you a copy of the generic PowerPoint that you can then edit and use for your own devices. We do recommend, however, that whenever we're sending this out, let us know when the training is, where it's going to be, how much it's going to cost, so we can help you with publicity. And if you are charging for to do a training, we would expect you to tithe back into the national office. It's only fair to support the work we're doing. Personally, when I'm out doing trainings, I keep 2/3 and I send 1/3 back to the national office. Now, we're not asking for that, but we are asking for a tithe, and that'll be part of the agreement that will go out with the training certificates, okay? Our video resource, Justice That Heals, we mentioned that earlier, the story of forgiveness, and a very powerful story, and we use that. You have the link there on the PowerPoint, and supplemental audio-visual resources. Find some shorter ones. Let's say you only have 90 minutes, right? It's a workshop. Well, there are a number of short videos on YouTube that you can show that make the same point, perhaps not with the detail of an hour video, but CBS has one on a woman in Minnesota who recommends to her landlord that the young man who killed her son as a teenager has now been rehabilitated and now is coming back in society, and he moves in next door to her. There's another one of a Samoan family where the father kills a woman in a car crash under the influence, and the family of the deceased woman reaches out to the Samoan family and embraces them. Training resources. There's the website. And as I mentioned, we have a resource toolkits page on the menu. When you click on that, you'll see what I mentioned earlier, the 3 versions: the Black Church version, the Christian Ecumenical version, and the Interfaith version. One thing that you can do in running a workshop is you can use the table of contents as a handout, so that people can see everything, excuse me, so people can see everything that's in the handbook. And the table of contents is the same in all 3 versions. What's different is the theology. Okay? Second resource is the PowerPoint. You've all seen a version of it. We say that, number one, it should be customized, make it fit the group audience you're showing it to. We have a generic version available here at the national office that we can send out, and we just ask that as you edit it to fit your particular framework, send us a copy so that we can see what you're going to be showing. Okay, we think not only do we think that's fair. Let me give you a perfect example. A group was getting ready to show the PowerPoint to their local sheriff, and they wanted to add a picture. They wanted to add something more specific about women, and so they went online and found an incarcerated woman and put her in the slide. Thankfully, they sent it to me the day before, because I recognized that the incarcerated woman was Tyler Perry in his role as Medea Goes to Jail. And I was able to stop her from using that slide. You can't make this up, okay? So she would have gone into the sheriff's office the next day and shown a picture of Tyler Perry in drag, and that probably would not have been a good idea to get healing communities going in that county. So we just ask that as you make your modifications, send them back, let us review it, and then we can send it back to you. I mentioned earlier that A Justice That Heals is now available on YouTube. There's the link. And there are supplemental audiovisual resources, and what I mean by that is if I only have 90 minutes, there's some clips online on YouTube that are 3 to 5 minutes long of restorative justice encounters. There's one that I use from Philadelphia, where a young man kills another young man. He does 10 years, turns his life around, and then his victim's brother stalks him for another 10 years until they're brought together and reconciled, and now they go into high schools and do peace training.
I love it.
Yeah. And then there's another one on CBS. It's a CBS Forgiveness Moment, where a woman is, she actually lives in the same apartment building next door to the young man that killed her son. And they take you through her process of losing her son, forgiving her son's killer, and then becoming his advocate when he comes back into society. And so there are all kinds of short, tight AV resources that you can find, and a lot of it depends on your audience. That story from Minnesota is a Christian story. The story in Philadelphia with the young man is a Muslim story. There's also a great Mormon story. Depends on who you're talking to. Sometimes I'll show all three, especially if I'm in an interfaith gathering or if I'm working with a government agency, to let them know that this framework can work in any faith context. Because, like I said, when we're working with a public agency, sometimes they need that assurance. Those kinds of resources are invaluable, and you really want to make sure that you have those available. And that's not all, because we have partner resources. If you remember from the training video, Sesame Street has a character now who has a father who's incarcerated, and they have a half-hour episode that you can download from the Sesame Street website for children between the ages of 3 and 8 who are dealing with the incarceration of a parent. Amachi Mentoring has been doing great work mentoring children of the incarcerated, and our board chair, Wilson Good, of course, is the president of Amachi Mentoring. Project Iron Kids produces a coloring book for children of incarcerated parents that helps them to understand and helps them to deal with their emotions and at their situation of having an incarcerated parent. Scholarships is one of our partners here in Washington, D.C. They give scholarship money to young men and women who are going to college, who have an incarcerated parent. And then D Free Ministries out of the Central New Jersey Community Development Corporation has a special partnership with us where you can access their training in financial literacy and debt management. You can have their training at your church at a reduced rate if your church is a Station of Hope, because we know that there's a financial strain on every family that has a loved one that's incarcerated. Textbooks, I mentioned earlier, Ministry of Prisoners and Families, The Way Forward. That's one resource. Also, there are these nice little booklets. That are put out by the Institute for Prison Ministry. This one is called Help, My Loved One's in Jail, What Do I Do Now? There's another one called Sentence, Now What? And there's a third on what to do if your child is arrested. And these are Christian books. They give you a little outline of what happens to a person when they move through the system and how you can be supportive. And so we recommend these books, and some of them are available at the national office. Others you can get at IPM Resources. Institute for Prison Ministries, which is located at Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois. And the most important resource, besides the Holy Spirit, is you. All of us are invested in this for some personal reason. Somebody close to us, our own story. Some of us have been incarcerated. Some of us have incarcerated children and grandchildren. Some of us have been victimized by crime. And your stories, I mean, if you've ever heard, if any of you trained with me, you know that one of the things that I do is I insert a lot of my stories as illustrations of what's going on in different areas and how to make these things work. You are an important resource to this, because at the end of the day, what's going to pull people in are stories and not statistics, names and not numbers, faces, not facts. We have about 20 minutes left. I'm going to do a couple other things, but I want to know if there are any questions up to this point. We good? Where it says healing communities build on the faith community's unique strengths. And one of the things we're trying to do here is help the congregation to understand that we're not asking them to do anything that they don't already do. Remember that? So I want to say to a congregation, is there anything up here that you don't do? Right? Because so many people look at, reentry and prison ministry as specialized stuff, right? And you may need specialized training to be a chaplain, working on the inside, but in terms of caring for families and people coming home, God has already given us what we need. So this slide, what I'm trying to do with this slide is get people to see that this is normal. This can be normal for your church. Now let's pick another slide. What am I trying to do with this slide? If I'm showing this slide to a congregation, when a person is moving through the criminal justice system, they have 3 questions. Mm-hmm. Can I trust you? Do you care about me? Can you help me? Mm-hmm. Establish the trust. When churches show up, what question do they usually try to answer first?
Jesus loves you.
No, of these three.
Oh, which one?
Yeah.
Do you care about me? I'm here. I care about you.
Usually, my experience is that the first question they want to answer is, I'm here to help.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to do with this slide is I want congregations to understand that just because you help somebody doesn't mean you care about them.
Yeah.
And just because you care doesn't mean that you're willing to build relationships of trust. Pam, you said it, I heard you say this as soon as this went up. It's about relationship building. Mm-hmm. And if I can build a relationship with you, then I can help you and you can trust me.
Amen.
Because all of you know, in working with men and women who move through the system, that they have had so many promises of help broken to them from childhood, and then in the school systems, and then people in the criminal justice system who are there to help but who don't for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And so when I show up and offer to help, I'm just another one in a long line of people who have some resources, and I may give them to them, may not. And so if I don't build a relationship of trust, but I show up to help, what's going to happen to me as a helper?
It's just going to be another one. You're going to be gone. We actually teach them to become help resistant.
Oh, that's good. Say more.
Well, I've been at this for a very long time, and what I've learned is that if we don't develop, because the order you have this is exactly what needs to happen. We need to develop that trust first, and that we actually do care, and then they're able to receive help, because they have been in an environment where they have to be in perpetual self-defense.
There you go.
Even before they got it.
Yeah, it's a lifelong thing. And so, to get them to be able to receive anything, to just have that humility posture of reception is the biggest change agent that happens.